about the rest of our schedule for the semester because I think it's a little heavy. What do you guys think? Is it too heavy? No?
See.
Yes.
Okay.
It looks good.
I'm like, I think it's a little heavy. So I'm going to modify some assignments. I don't want to completely necessarily get rid of assignments yet, although I'm open to it. I'm open to getting rid of some of these. Uh, I made it all live last night. And so you probably got a ton of notifications from me. But like at the end of this week on Sunday, you're supposed to have a big history outline. I'm thinking I can modify that to make it a smaller assignment than it was originally meant to be. But we can talk about that in a little bit. You're gonna have so these smaller discussions. They're small, so those are not, those aren't gonna take a lot. The bigger things coming up is the public history presentation. Those presentations. If anybody has taken a look at the assignment now, I have the prompt up. It'll be a, what did I say, 15 to 20-minute presentation that is meant to be for a public audience. So it's up to you to decide what kind of venue your talk would be good for. But something like a public library would be great, or an archive or a museum, anything like that. It's up to you to choose who your audience would be, as long as it's meant to be something that's open to everyone. Um, but those of you that know me know that I like to give you the option of filming your presentation instead of giving it live. So I've blocked off enough space in our syllabus that every single one of you could present live on Zoom. That's what I mean by live, not in person, on Zoom. But for those of you that would prefer, you could submit a video file on Canvas. So if you like, especially if you have social anxiety, if you're just not very good at live presentations, one way to still practice presenting without as much of the pressure is to film yourself. Right? You still get some of that practice with taking away, hopefully, a little bit of that anxiety that I know some of you feel for it. And the topic would be any topic of your choice, literally anything. uh, the main thing though in making that so broad is that it has to be something you're comfortable with, right? Ideally, my recommendation would be to not pick something you don't know anything about yet, right? So that you're not having to do research. Instead, you want to think about what are you most comfortable talking about. If I did like a pop quiz right now and I asked you all have to present something for a certain amount of time, tell me, and to present, you should have something in the back of your head that I'm like, yeah, I've done a lot of reading, a lot of research on this particular topic or that, and that should be the topic you pick for this presentation. Let me check. Pokemon. Okay, no, it has to be related to history. But actually, you could relate Pokemon to history. So okay, it can. My brother could actually give you a run for your money on Pokemon, but so not just anything. It should be something history related, but meant for the public. So it doesn't even have to be something like brand new, revolutionary. No, it could be something as simple as you design a 15-20-minute talk on women's history. Pick one topic that falls under the umbrella of women's history, and talk about that. It could be on a movie, on a historical movie. It could be one document, right? One document that you've done a lot of work on and that you're very comfortable, and presenting that to the public, if, if it's of public interest, right? That something like that would work. Let me see what else are you saying in the comments. It can be either specific or broad. That would be up to you, depending on the audience, right? So if you're presenting it at like a public library, something like that, it can be a little bit more broader. But if you're presenting it at like a museum or something a little bit more academic, then it would have to be something much more narrow and specific, right? So some of that depends on what your audience is. right? Like I can imagine like one of the things that I've seen public libraries do a lot in recent years is to invite experts, professors from the universities to come give a talk. Sometimes it's a talk that's open to the entire public. They just send out it in their mailer for everybody. But sometimes it's a talk for like teenagers, right? You're giving a talk to where they're going to be inviting primarily people, kids in their teens, or sometimes they'll invite people to come talk mostly to the younger kids, right? So you can pick what I'm when I talk about audience. That's also what I'm talking about there. The age group of your audience you can choose, right? And mostly because I've seen this being done very successfully by things like public libraries, by museums, by archives, by like local historical societies have been very interested in things like that. Punk rock in Los Angeles would be a great topic, Adrian. That would be a great topic. Yeah. So that talk would be completely up to you, and we can work on, I can work individually with you all on what some of those topics would be. So that is really the biggest assignment left to do in the semester, right? Let me scroll down, back down. So we have this big history outline. We have some smaller discussion board posts, but then the big history presentation is the big one. And then the very last thing, this is going to be during final exams week. I'm going to ask for two things from you: a teaching philosophy, and we're going to be talking about what a teaching philosophy is and what it involves in the next few weeks. It's going to be a 1 to 2 page document. So in terms of length, it's not very long. In terms of the content, it's a little bit, it requires more work because it's you deciding and explaining what your approach to teaching is. And so that's the hard work in that assignment, is really coming up with, why do I prefer these methods of teaching? What is my classroom management style? What is my grading style? Explaining those things and putting them in paper is not easy. So that's time consuming. The other thing I'm going to ask for the for final exams week is a teaching data. I called it a teaching database, but I want you to have a list of teaching resources. That is actually one of the most valuable things that I got in graduate school. Was one of my professors actually just emailed us all a document where he had all of his teaching resources. And it was just a Word document with a bunch of links that were divided by topics. That was it. And it really, and as I've been teaching, I think that has been one of the most useful things for me, is to have this tab that I have up here of teaching, where I have files of some of the most useful websites for me, right? So things like, open resource, primary source documents, right? That's something that when we teach history is one of the biggest things we're always looking for: primary sources. And if they're already open resource, so you don't have to worry about copyright or anything like that, that's even better. And that fact that they're online, formatted so that you can just print it and hand it to students, those are the best kind of resources to have as you prepare to teach. But it's useful to have it all organized in some way. So I'm going to ask you to show me proof that you have at least 15 teaching or researching resources. So if you know for sure you're not going into teaching, then you can give me just researching resources. Those are fine. Any website that we have talked about in this class, or that have been in our readings, any of those will work. And basically, as you can see on the prompt here, I don't even care how you organize it. I really don't care, as long as you have a list somewhere organized in some way that makes sense to you, that you can submit to me. That's the main purpose of this. It's just like something as simple of just having like a Word document or a Google Doc document with a bunch of websites is just such a huge time saver. Huge time saver. So I guess right now, what I care most about is how stressed out, how are we all doing with our mental health? Because that's going to dictate how I modify our assignment for this week. Do you want to tell me now, or would you rather see the assignment first? No preferences?
I think see the assignments first.
Okay, so this is the big history outline. So originally I had conceived it of just an outline of how a year-long course on teaching big history would look like. Oh, hold on, let me check the chat. Thinking about it gives you stress. This is the stressful part. But okay, but this is the one that I'm willing to modify a lot. So let's look at it. So the purpose of this assignment is really one of giving you a little bit of practice, because one of the hardest things we have to do when we teach is put together, for me, it's putting together a syllabus, basically, right? And having something like a syllabus, a year-long just outline of what the course is. One, it's mandatory, because as you think about what you're going to do, what you're going to give students in terms of, their guidelines for what they're working on each year, each semester, but also to see that you are, as proof to give to administration, that you're fulfilling all the requirements for the school and all of that. So part of a course outline is that it's required. In a lot of ways, it's required. But it's also really useful as we plan our own teaching to have an outline of what the entire year is going to look like, and how each week fits into the overall goals of the class, right? How does each week meet the course objectives, right? And if you don't have a whole plan for the year, it's really easy to get lost, right? And basically be on like last minute burnout mode the entire time. And so creating a course outline is really useful. A lot of times though, when we get told to create a course outline, we are either not given enough time, or just by the nature of like what teaching is, we end up doing it last minute, right? Have any of you asked your professors for a course syllabus months in advance of the class? No? Has anybody asked a professor for the syllabus before the class starts? No, no one has even done that. Sorry, the light's hitting. Oh, weird. Okay.
No, that feels illegal.
No, it feels like I don't want to bother them. They already got enough stress.
This is something that's rather unique in this campus. I have never experienced that at any other campus other than Cal State LA. Only one person has ever asked me for the syllabus before the class starts. And actually, you're actually doing well by not asking for it. If you ask most professors for their syllabus, even a week before classes start, they don't have it. They just don't have it. Even if they've taught the class before, they don't have it. Because every semester we have to update at the very minimum the dates in the syllabus. Yeah, and a lot of us just also procrastinate on it, right? It's just the way it works. You leave it to the last minute. And I'm like, I know your professors complain about students procrastinating, but there's no bigger procrastinators than professors. And so you end up really not having a lot of time, and you're relying on all your skills, does everything you have to put together a course outline, which ideally, that's not what you want to do. You're an undergrad, not a PhD. Yeah. But at other campuses, this is a bigger thing. And I think mostly here is because most of you are working and have other responsibilities. So you literally don't want to know anything about the class until it starts. But like when I was at UC Irvine and I was a teaching assistant, almost everybody, if I didn't have a syllabus up the week before classes started, I would get emails from students asking, because some of them are people who are doing, their pre-med and they just want to get your history class out of the way, things like that. And it's very competitive. Um, when I was a student at Cal Lutheran, I knew students would ask their professors for the syllabi ahead of time as well, or ask for an old syllabi so they could know what to expect for the semester. And that happens in a lot of places. If you're teaching K through 12, it's probably not going to happen. But the reason it's important to know how to do one is because you will have to create one, and you're not going to have a lot of time to create one, either because you're not given enough time or because you procrastinate and don't end up with enough time to do it. Right? And I thought, because we've been talking a lot about big history, and because we have a website that organizes the big history curriculum for us, that we could use that to do a rough outline of what a big history class would look like, right? So my original vision for this assignment is that you would create a kind of syllabus, but without assignments, without readings, just the topics, right? So this is the example that I put on the prompt, right? So a class, for example, on the Civil War and Reconstruction could be divided into these units, right? Let's say that this is a college class for now, because that's usually these kinds of topics are more for like university classes. So you would divide it into the Union in crisis, the Civil War, and the Reconstruction era, right? And then within each of these units, you would have, this one has 3 to 5 different topics under each unit, right? So this would be a whole unit on the Union. So maybe one of the topics would be slavery, states' rights, and Western expansion, the rising tide of protest and violence, political alignment deepens the crisis, and then Lincoln, secession, and war. These are totally like, there's no set way, no set subtopics unless the standards demand it, right? Unless like core standards demand it. For the Civil War, right? This is what a professor would choose to focus on, right? Or what this person that did this outline focused on, right? Resources, strategies, early battles, African Americans in the war, life during the war, turning points of the wars, and an impact. Like if I were teaching a class on the American Civil War, I would structure these points differently. And there's no right or wrong here, except that you have to have these are choices you have to make, right? Like you have to decide what topics you would cover and what topics you would focus on. And it doesn't make it right or wrong, it's just choices that have to be made. And oftentimes it comes down to, what are your favorite topics to talk about when it comes to the Civil War? Or what topics do you have materials on for the Civil War? Right? So like if I don't have anything on, African Americans in the war, then I might leave it out. On the other hand, actually, if I were to teach a class in the Civil War, I would probably devote an entire unit just to African Americans in the war. And so I would divide this into more subtopics, right? So it's just choices that instructors make. And for the purposes of this assignment, there's no real right or wrong. It's just choices you make, right? So has anyone ever had to do something like this? Like a course outline and just like plan out topics for an entire course? No? Or at a small scale for a unit?
I think I did. I had to do something for the American Revolution. Like
Okay.
like what led up to it and the outcome and all that stuff.
Yeah, okay. So, and then a kind of outline. And this is why I think it's useful to do some practice, because when you start doing it, you're kind of just thrown in and like do it. And it's like, well, wait a minute, how do I do one? And there's not a real like right or wrong of how to do an outline either. Everyone I know does it a little bit different. So I want to talk about some of that now. And then at the end, we'll talk about how we can make this assignment manageable. Although I think now as I'm talking about it, it doesn't sound so bad anymore. So this is why I thought big history would be an easier way to go rather than like doing a world history or a US history course, because big history is already planned out for you in a lot of ways. in terms of the thresholds that are part of big history, right? So let me go to the big history course. Aha, okay. They actually on their website already divided into units, right? They have 10 units with an introduction and then each threshold. Threshold 1, they actually paired up threshold 2 and 3 together, stars and their elements, which I've seen a lot of different big history people do it that way. And then all the way to 7. And then here is where they divide it into several units, right? Once you get into more of what is more traditionally world history, you can divide this however you want. And then if you want to include a unit on the future, then you include a unit on the future. So I thought we could do some of this together, like some of what you will even submit to me, we can do together here. So actually, I will move this to a Google Doc so that I can just link what we end up doing together here to our course website. So I made it just big, just so that it's visible. This, I will make it a regular font later on. But so basic, one of the things that all of your outlines should have are all 8 thresholds, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, something that nobody talks about in terms of when you make an outline is that you always want to build in room for things like an introduction, right? This is why, what is it? Everybody calls week 1 of the semester syllabus week, because it's expected that at least that first week of school, you're not going to have a lot to do, right? Well, how do we do that? How do we build that into it? By building these introduction units in here, right? I mean, they're pretty important at the beginning of the school year because you want to ease people in. And there's also a lot of administrative stuff that just practically in terms of teaching, you need to leave room for, right? People moving classes, people adding last minute, being registered last minute. There's just a lot of movement at the beginning of the semester that you want to give yourself wiggle room for. So you always put in an introduction. Some of you actually in your big history activities that you submitted to me a couple of weeks ago did activities that would introduce big history to students. And I thought, yes, that's something like that would work really well as an introductory activity, right? Then over here, you might want to do a unit on the future. Those of you, especially those of you that have taken big history before, would you want to do, if you were teaching big history, would you do a unit on the future?
Yes.
Yes, anybody say, let me stop sharing. Anybody says no? Some of you.
I didn't take the course, but it sounds like fun.
It is. It's something that actually historians and even history students, when I've taught big history, are really averse to talking about the future. But my pitch for adding something on the future when teaching big history or any history class really is that a lot of us see history as cyclical, right? It does moves in kind of the circular fashion that a lot of things seem to repeat, right? And if that's the case, then who better to try to predict what's going to happen in the future than historians? But you don't need a crystal ball to figure out what are the possibilities of what might happen in the future, right? Like, what do you think is going to happen in the rest of 2021? Can we make some predictions about just 2021?
Zombie apocalypse.
I thought we were already in the middle of that. Maria, what?
Hopefully half the world population will have been vaccinated.
Yeah, we can talk about rates of vaccinations as going up, right? That's a pretty safe prediction because we're seeing how fast the governments are getting at handing out them. There's still a lot of roadblocks, but we can deliver vaccines pretty quickly. Now we just need to get it to globally to more people. Yitzhak is saying in the chat, earthquakes. Is that a safe prediction to make? That's probably even in the next 5 to 10 years. Are we going to have an earthquake?
We had 3 yesterday.
Did you guys feel them?
It was awful.
I felt
It's like
that.
440.
I got kind of spooked.
I love talking about earthquakes in big history classes, by the way, because it's just so relevant to all of our lives in California.
It was awful. It was at 4:40 in the morning. I'm like, that's not a way to wake us up.
But I thought they were small earthquakes. Weren't they all like 4.0?
Oh, it's in Lenox. I think one was in Lenox, and I live in like Palms, Culver City area. So it was awful.
So if you're like on top of it, then you feel all of it. You felt too, see? And that, okay, actually, this is something that we can use. This is something that we can put in our outline in multiple different parts, right? So we can put that in our future outline. So I'm gonna do a kind of just really unofficial outline, I guess. I'm gonna put earthquakes in here because that's actually something really important to talk about in terms of the future living in California. But where else on these thresholds could we talk about earthquakes?
I think it's threshold 4, our solar system and Earth.
Yeah, I would put it there. I think that can work there. Why? Anyone want to say why it would work talking about earthquakes?
We gotta talk about the tectonic plates
Because
and Pangea and how that formed now.
exactly. When you talk about how the earth is formed, and it's literally like a collision of a bunch of stuff in space, the collision of a bunch of rocks in space, end up creating planets. And then you can and you have to talk about all the layers of how within our planet, within Earth, and that is a great place to talk about earthquakes and plate tectonics and all of that. Absolutely, yeah. Any other place? No. I usually talk about it in threshold 8. Again, you don't have to. This I'm kind of making executive decisions here. I'm putting it in threshold 8 because in threshold 8, when talking about modernity and industrialization, I like talking a lot about environmental history themes, and earthquakes is a great way of talking about like environmental changes. So okay, we can put some of those there, right? Something else you can even when creating a schedule, you might also want to put some room at the end for just like a kind of conclusion, right? Kind of give yourself some room at the end to like just have a party, have a have a just wind down things at the end to celebrate the end, right? Okay, so looking at our outline here, then we want to make some bullet points for all of these thresholds, right? Anybody have any interest? Which thresholds should we work on in class together?
In class together, at least.
Wait, which one, Christian?
In class together, at least I think so.
Ooh, I don't think I could hear you. Let me stop
Threshold
sharing.
3, because I don't know anything about chemical elements.
Okay. I was going to say, Christian, I think you were saying we should do all of them. And we can do as many as we have here. But threshold 3, okay, this is an interesting one because actually it's a good choice to pick thresholds that you know the least about, right? So chemical elements, and I think these two, threshold 2 and 3, usually go together. But let's look at just chemical elements, right? So the way I would start creating bullet points for that threshold, for that unit, would be to go into the Big History database and see what they say, right? So stars and the elements, let's go to the unit page. Is my internet being slow? Okay, so you probably want to go over here to creation of complex elements, and let's see what resources they tell us, what they would have, because this is a great way to create an outline to already have resources that are given to you. Okay, so one of the things you would want to do probably for every threshold is to have an introduction to the threshold, right? This is one of the things that they have activities for as well. Oops, sorry, I'm going to the wrong page. So I would put in here an intro to chemical elements. Right, and let me go back here, see what else. Vocabulary, so you can have some of that on there. New elements. So this is a video, and what did stars give us? So here in what did star gives us, what this is talking about really is how each element is formed, right? So if you can look at, like you can kind of see it in the image that we get in this video, but iron, silicon, oxygen, neon, carbon, all of that. So one of the things that becomes important in this threshold is the periodic table of elements, the periodic table. You're gonna have to spend some time on it, talking about what are the basic elements and then everything else. You don't have to talk about each individual element, but you'd want to talk at least about some key ones, especially things like oxygen and iron, carbon, helium, and hydrogen, right? Those as being kind of foundational elements, right? Let's see, I'm looking at some of these other things. Silver. So another good way of talking about the elements is to focus on a few key ones that are not just like, that don't feel so abstract, right? Sometimes when we talk about oxygen, it can feel really abstract because oxygen's like, I don't see it. I need it, right? I need it to survive. Those of us who have asthma really know to appreciate oxygen. But it might, for us historians, we might not feel as comfortable talking about some of the scientific elements, but we might feel more comfortable talking about things like silver, right? And how silver is formed and how it has impacted human history. Can anybody think off the top of their head, how has silver impacted human history?
Money.
Yeah, money, right? Anything else or anything going along with money?
I'm not sure if this is correct, but during colonization, I'm not sure if it was silver or gold, because there was so much coming in from Mexico. They had like a huge sort of depression and recession in parts of Europe because of colonization and the amount of silver, I think.
Silver.
Yeah, am I correct on that?
Yeah,
Okay.
silver.
It was mined in the Americas. It was transported by European ships. And where was it taken to?
Spain.
So the Spain, So some of it was the Spanish, but a lot of it was actually going to places like China. There was a high demand for silver in China, and being able to mine it out of the Americas gave the Europeans a lot of like a strategic upper hand with China, basically, right? The Europeans at this point had been trying to get a foothold into China, and basically the Europeans never had anything to give the Chinese that they wanted, right? A lot of Chinese goods was just so much superior to the Europeans, but they really, really hit on something when they found silver mines in the Americas, because that was something that was in high demand in China, and it gave them a trading leverage. It gave Europeans a trading leverage in China. So it's something that was global. It was a global trade that brings in a lot of different parts of the world. So yeah, so I'm like, you might not know all the specifics off the top of your head, but you were all like spot on with that. Is a major movement of gold that impacts, of silver that impacts a lot of different communities and a lot of different time periods even, right? So you can talk about just about the minting of coins, but then also about the transportation of silver around the world. But you can do the same thing, not just with silver, but I should put this under silver, but also with gold. right? What can we talk about gold if we wanted to do a unit on gold?
$18.49.
Yeah, and what I want to elaborate a little bit.
The gold rush?
So, oh, okay, yeah, absolutely, yeah, the gold rush. So that would be something, and that would be something that great to connect to in our units on California, right? So the gold rush, and there you can bring in all your gold rush material. You can have field trips. Let me add it into the outline. So I'm going to put it in as West Coast U.S. Gold Rush, not to be confused with any other gold rush. Anything else we can talk about under gold?
I was
Mhm.
thinking maybe, well, yeah, colonization, and also like even nowadays with
Slavery?
technology.
Wait, say that again, Abigail. Nowadays,
With technology, a lot of tech uses gold as like I forget what it is, but I know it uses it.
yes, and actually, if you want to talk about today, technology, and also like there was this rush of people buying gold recent times. Yeah, the one I was going to add is colonization of the Americas, right? No, it was God, glory, and gold. What the Spanish said they were coming to the Americas for, not necessarily in this order, but you can use that as an entryway into some of those topics as well. Yeah,
You can also use pirateering as well.
pirates. Oh, I love pirates. Yes. For those of you, okay, so Arturo, do you want to explain a little bit why pirates fits in so well here?
Oh, because when Spain was in control, they used to move their gold through ships, and some of those ships used to sink in the bottom, so the pirates used to go underneath, stand underneath to get the gold. So it used to become very treacherous because also they were European citizens, so it used to start wars between both of them. And Europeans actually used to give licenses to the pirates or to steal.
Yes, pirating was a very popular job. It's some of it out of necessity for people that live like in the outskirts of polite society. It was literally the only thing. It was also one of those things where pirates were a lot more progressive in terms of social issues. Runaway slaves could often turn to pirate ships and could make a living out of being pirating. There were female pirates, women that were lesbians, um, found a kind of safe haven in pirating. Right? Like, so there's a lot of actually really interesting things going on in pirating in terms of like social stuff, and then the political, uh, global politics of that. Yeah, pirating would be something you could put in there under the talking about here. Uh, using the gold as the element that you talk about, right? You would talk about the scientific stuff of how the elements are formed, and then as a subunit of all of that, you can talk about kind of the social and political implications of softness. How are elements formed? Anyone want to give the quick one sentence summary, or has it been too long?
Wasn't it stars exploding?
Yes, that's why it's usually paired up with this over here. It's the the explosions of the stars, which is part of the cycle of stars. It's called the life cycle. Yeah, and as they explode, they release the elements into the universe, and then that can get sucked into the process of creating planets. And that's why some planets have certain elements, certain atmospheres, and others don't, right? It's kind of a process of how the life cycle of the star. So the bigger the star is, the more elements it creates, right? So the bigger the star, the more elements it creates. And so when it explodes, it releases more elements into the universe. That's a very short version of it. But that, that all is a building block for the next threshold. Anything else we could talk about in stars and galaxies? I'm like, we're working backwards, but since this one's related, what about talking about our sun? Now, why might our sun be an important thing to talk about under stars and galaxies? Let's see if I can find a hint in here.
Could it be because all the planets revolve around the sun?
Yeah, but in terms of the organization of galaxies, how galaxies are organized, that would be a good thing. We can put that in there. The other thing is that our sun is a star, right? It's a star, and eventually, what's going to happen to our sun?
Explode?
It's going to explode. What's going to happen to the Earth when the sun explodes?
Sucked into
We
a
die.
black hole.
R.I.P.
Yes, RIP, we die. The Earth will get blown up in that. We're close enough that we will be directly impacted by the explosion of our sun. Fortunately for us, it's not going to happen within our lifetime. It's a really long process, but our sun is in the process of, it's at the end of its life cycle.
The only way 2021 could get any worse is if our sun exploded.
Or if we had like some sort of meteorite or something coming straight towards Earth. We will be Sarah Connor in Terminator 2. I love that. Actually, so that's the other thing that I was hoping somebody would bring up. When we talk about sci-fi, I would love to have had more time in my big history class to talk about science fiction and talking about stars and galaxies and chemical elements. Anybody have any ideas of how we can bring sci-fi, science fiction into these thresholds?
Maybe having like a short story. I remember there was this one short story. I forgot what it was called, but it was talking about entropy. I think it was called The Last Question, and it was talking about it goes through various stages of like the Earth, and it's a really short sci-fi story, and it's really good, and I think it contextualizes all of this really well.
Yeah, actually, and I would even put that over here under the Big Bang when you're just talking about what's in the, the way the universe functions and the fact that it's expanding and what's in the universe. So maybe actually you could fit both there, but there are really nice short stories that can really give you a strong visual of some of these concepts, right? So yeah, there's a lot of really good sci-fi short stories collections that we can look to for some of this. Yeah, some recent, but also some older ones. I was just reading. I've been reading Jules Verne for fun. Don't ask me why, but I've been reading Jules Verne, and he has a short story that's all like about the cycles of history. Neil deGrasse Tyson has that book it's a really small book that talks about kind of the history of the universe, and he talks about each of these steps really. So assigning something from a book like that can be valuable depending on the age group, right? It might work. But even for younger kids, I've been looking, when I first taught big history class, I looked through a lot of picture books because there's a lot of picture books that describe like the Big Bang and describe stars and galaxies. And I thought it was a really great way to boil these concepts down to their bare minimums, right? Like how would we create a picture book that would explain these concepts to really, really young kids? Right? So that's something that either looking at picture books or creating, creating your own picture book can be a fun activity to include in that. Yeah. But also, am I spelling that correctly? I'm not a Trekkie. And I've watched actually very little Star Trek. But every time I teach the big history class, somebody, like almost in every unit, somebody has a Star Trek reference. Any Trekkies in here? No. Oh my goodness. I'm asking. We're all probably in the wrong generation to be Trekkies, right?
Trekkies are nerds. Star Wars is where it's at.
I kind of
Really,
want to either.
Star Wars. Oh, Star Wars is very simplistic.
I've seen it
Ooh.
and I like it, but similarly, I didn't like Stargate SG-1 either.
My friend used to say that Star Wars were for people who don't like to think, and Star Trek was for people who like philosophy.
Oh.
Like I said, nerds.
But
Intellectuals enjoy Star Trek. Well,
Kinda
that's-
true.
sounds like something a Trekkie would say.
And to be fair, I'm like, I'm not in either camp. But
Battlestar Galactica.
See, he knows. He knows Battlestar Galactica is the wave.
to go, oh my goodness. Star Wars, I don't know how we could fit Star Wars in here. We could probably, if you really worked at it, you could probably figure it out. Maybe even more into talking about the future, talking about, kind of a future we might imagine in which there's life outside of our galaxy. Well, perhaps. Yitzhak, was that a funny comment, or was that or do I need, what is life? I'm like, don't let me miss any important topic you're all covering. But okay, let's get back to the outline. But there's so many ways, I think, of kind of having fun with some of these thresholds and including other things, right? Where I think you will have a lot of freedom is over here. Once you get to agriculture, modernity and industrialization, literally anything that has happened since the Industrial Revolution goes under threshold 8. So this is something where you really might have a lot more subtopics, right? Because you might want to talk about earthquakes, but maybe not. You for sure have to talk about industrialization. What else do you have to talk about when talking about the whole world from industrialization to today? All the isms can go in here. Imperialism is something that you might want to talk about. The slave trade.
Capitalism.
Capitalism, the development, because these whole things, by the way, industrialization, imperialism, slave trade, and capitalism, they're happening at the same time. So I always actually get a little bit annoyed when people talk about them as separate things, because they're developing at the same time, and it's really hard, I think, to break them up into their own systems when they literally reinforce each other. So to me, it's really hard to talk about them as separate things when they are all working as together. But what else?
Could you maybe relate this unit back to the other ones by talking about the impact of these things on the earth and on like life on earth, maybe like through pollution and like, yeah.
Yeah, that would be a great way to tie it in together. And in fact, I think that's one of the advantages of big history, is that you can do that so easily, right? That everything comes back to, okay, what are the resources of, what are we doing to resources available on this planet? What is happening to the planet? What role are humans and the planet playing, right? So I think that that's one of the advantages of that. But if you don't like that, this is also where you can talk about more about, you know, you could make it from these bigger themes and make it into these smaller themes. So working class life, you can talk about being a working class person meant for in different parts of the world, right? What does it mean to be a member of the working class in Argentina, in Peru versus Russia, right? Or other places, because there's going to be a lot of parallels in the way we can analyze that. So a lot of it is kind of bigger strokes, but there are ways of finding these kind of smaller stories to work on here, right? Another one is women's rights. This would be the place to talk about things like women's rights at both maybe national scales, but also global scales. The world wars. Now, one of the things that as you're creating an outline for this or creating themes for this, one of the things that I will check for is, are you going to talk about the world wars as one thing, or are you going to put World War I and World War II as two separate ones? All right, because I can put world wars in my as a bullet point, or I can put in World War I and World War II. What would you all choose?
That's interesting. Okay, I think it's
Can we? Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Christian.
I
Sorry.
just want to say it's interesting because I think it's interesting to see like whether they're separate or like where, because there are different incidents that lead up to World War II, but it's also parts of World War I kind of influence that happens in World War II. So I think that's an interesting way to go about it.
Yep, and this is why I'm bringing it up. I'm like, because it's a choice, right? But Maria, what were you gonna add?
Actually, I agree with Christian. It's like World War II. Events from World War I is what led up to World War II, like the Treaty of, what was it, Paris or something? Like the restriction they put on Germany.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then the Russian Revolution. So yeah, I things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And same thing with like, okay, all the revolutions. Some people, instead of dividing it up, like some people don't put industrialization as its own theme. Some people put it under the Atlantic revolutions. And under that heading, it is the Industrial Revolution, the American Revolution. Usually it's just the French Revolution, those three, but I would add in the Haitian Revolution. And they group all of these as just the Atlantic revolutions. So that's one way, also one choice that you can make, either separate these out or just put them all into one unit.
Would philosophy fit here?
Yes, absolutely. What kind of philosophy are you thinking?
I guess like Marxism, especially at this time.
Yeah, and I mean that, if I can spell it correctly, that could go on its own, right? Depending on how you want to talk about it. Like you can divide those ideologies into their own categories. Marxism.
Oh, Enlightenment. Well, you
communism.
could put the Enlightenment era too.
And some people don't even have that as their own unit. Some people just put that as like, this is inherently here. Mm-hmm. But the Enlightenment, as a French historian, I think the Enlightenment deserves its own bullet point. But that would be like my thing, right? Because I'm like, I have a lot of material on just the Enlightenment. And so I would be able to just like do a whole unit on the Enlightenment. But again, those are choices, right? And then actually, even just now, right? Let's stop for a moment and look at everything we have for threshold 8. Is this just enough for a unit on this, or is this too much?
Too much.
Let me all put it all on the same page so it's visible. What do the rest of you think? Is this too much to include in one unit?
Yeah, it's a little too much there.
Yeah, kind of have to pick and choose which ones intertwine the best and which ones like tell the best narrative, I guess.
Yeah, like instead of dividing these into its own separate things, then maybe you can like decide that I would do a week or 2 weeks on these three things and how they're connected. Right, and I can even designate on here, it would be 1 week. And those are the kind of practical choices where you really have to decide what is important for you. What is important for you to have in these units. Right, right now, actually, and for this assignment, I don't think, like, I'm not going to make you make the super hard choices. Like, you can just be idealistic with this outline and just put in the stuff you wish you could talk about, right? Because most of us are not big history experts, so I'm going to let you just kind of design an ideal course outline. But in terms of a practical course outline, one of the main things that would have to guide you is, do I have teaching materials to do a unit on these topics? Because if you don't, let's say you don't, you just didn't pay enough attention, or you don't care enough about Marxism and communism, then for the love of God, don't put a whole unit on Marxism and communism, right? You'd probably have to talk about it at some point, but you can kind of gloss over it if that's not something you're interested in doing. Same with some of these other topics, right? You would have to pick, okay, what is worth it for me to spend a week or more on? Right? And that, to me, I think it comes down to, do you have materials on this? Right? Like I'll be honest, there are topics for me that I wish I had more knowledge on, right? Like right now, I think I told a lot of you in some of the early assignments, one of the things that I am working on adding to my classes is more African history. Just African history, without including the Europeans, without necessarily needing any other part of the world, just African history. But that's something that was not part of my PhD. It was not part of my bachelor's degree. And so I don't have a strong knowledge of African history. I just don't. So what I'm doing is I'm finding resources to add it. But, it takes a while to be able to add things that you don't have any or have very little knowledge of. Right? And that's actually one of the big challenges of big history, because most of you are like probably going to look at some of these thresholds and think like, oh God, I don't even remember that. I forgot all about the periodic table of elements after I had to do it in high school. Right. And so some of this stuff, if you end up teaching it, it's like having to relearn some of it. That's why I think for the purposes of this assignment that you use this website, right, to guide you, right? Like here, they have videos on goals that can be used. Oh, here's another one, actually, salt. Salt as a really important element that has driven a lot of human history, right? Sugar is another one that could be used here in talking about the elements and make it more about humans rather than about the science of it. Alchemy has a really interesting history because for a long time all over the world, alchemy was a serious science. And alchemy as being like the process of like creating gold in a lab. Right? Scientists thought that they could eventually create gold in a lab, turn things into gold. Spoiler alert, we have never been able to figure out how to create that, how to turn things into gold. It was illegal at one point. I think it was in some places, but it was a serious scientific study. These days, it would not be considered a serious scientific study. It'd be pseudoscience, right? But at different points, it was a serious study. Okay, so how do we feel about this assignment now? All right, I guess I'm gonna use Yitzhak as the barometer since he's the only one talking about. Okay, Christian, I was like, I have to go by the people who speak up. So if you're not with us, then I'm so sorry. Hit and miss. Okay, so why don't we do this then? I'm gonna make. Oh, sorry. clicking buttons I shouldn't be clicking. The outline that I just, all the bullet points that I just had on here today, I'm going to put this into a, into a smaller font and link it on our class website so that if you want to use this, you can use it, right? And there you just take out what you don't like, move things around, but you can use this as a basis to start your own course outline. You already have the basics here, a unit on an introduction, threshold 1, threshold 2, all of the thresholds are here. So that's the main things you need in a course outline for big history. You would just need to go into each threshold and give me a minimum of like 2 to 3 at minimum bullet points, and some thresholds would have a lot more, right? And that would tell me how many bullet points you put under each threshold would tell me how much time you're going to spend on each threshold, right? And then you can decide if you have one on the future or not. Right, so all of these, it would be up to you to come finish adding bullet points to all of this, but you can work off of this one. Does that sound fair? No?
Yes.
I'm like, is that unfair? Tell me now. The other thing, so I've linked on here already on the prompt, that website, the Big History website. So if you don't have an account with them yet, now is your chance to make one with them. But I've also linked in the modules a couple of other things to help you. Okay, let me go to it. It's under week 10. Oh, shoot, did it? I'm like, it not function on me. It's not loading. Here it is. So these are some of the same resources that I had linked before the break. So like looking at the table of contents for some of these books might help you figure out what kind of bullet points you would want to put under each threshold. But the other thing that I put on here that might or might not be useful, but I wanted to make sure and point out, is that I put my own big history syllabus, because the majority of you haven't taken big history and the whole concept of big history is new to you. This would give you an idea of what I did, the choices I made for each threshold. Right, if you scroll down to the weekly thing, you can see how much time I spend on each threshold here. And because I put topics on here, these are essentially the bullet points that I put under my course outline. All right, so you can use some of that if you like. And if it doesn't help, then obviously don't use it. Those of you that took the big history class with Dr. Durad, you can use some of his, the way he broke those thresholds down, right? Because I think he spent a lot less time on some of these earlier thresholds, right, than some of what I did here. Like I spent an entire week on the Big Bang, an entire week on stars and its elements, a week just on Earth and the solar system and life. So I didn't get to humans until after the midterm in this class. Right? And I divided up by discipline. Like I focused on, okay, when analyzing early humans, we really need to know anthropology, right? When talking about Earth and its solar system, you really need is geology, right? And I would talk in class about like what geologists do, what kind of careers you can have in geology, that kind of thing. So that this might give you some ideas of what other things you can put into your threshold. Like I said, if you had Dr. Duran, you can use his, go back and see if you still have the syllabus from those semesters. And you can always use that to put in themes. So we will still have class on Thursday, I'm thinking. And one of the things we can do on Thursday is, well, I don't know, what do you think? Would it be worth it to have class on Thursday and go over a few more thresholds, or would you rather just have time to spend on the course outline? Am I giving you too many choices?
I guess the outline.
Just time for the outline?
Yeah.
Time spent on Thursday, yeah.
Okay, I'm like, I just need someone to second the motion. Okay, So then what I would do is not have class on Thursday. And instead, you could use that time to work on this. I'd be available online so that if you want to send me your rough draft of the course outline, you can send it to me at any point before Sunday. But your rough outline of what a big history course outline would look like, right? This assignment would be due Sunday by midnight. Right. Let me find it. Big history. It's Sunday by midnight. So I'm not requiring that you write explanations for all of these. I think you should have explanations in your head as you create an outline. But all I need is the bullet points, the units and the bullet points. Right, and that's what you will find I've described on the assignment prompt. What questions do you have though before I let you go? None?
Would you be available on Thursday, like to talk about more thresholds if we want to?
Yeah, so that's what I can do is be on the Zoom if anybody needs me. So I'll be in I can be in the Zoom during a regular class period. And then I'll also still have my office hours this week, both Wednesday and Thursday, 3 to 4.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm like, I love when it's just like, okay, you're working on it that day and I'm here to work on it with you. For those of you that want that, but I'm like, some of you just prefer like, just give me time to work on it. And that works too. All right, then the last thing I will say is that a handful of you never submitted the big history activity that was due right before the break. If you haven't submitted it, don't forget to submit it. I know some of you had asked me for the Life Happens class and I had given you time to do that. So if we talked over email about that, don't worry. You've got your deadline and there's no issue there. But for anybody that missed that assignment or any past assignment, you want to catch up. You already know these last few weeks at the end of the semester always go really fast and you don't want to leave things to the last minute. I'm being very flexible and accepting all late work right now. But you don't want to let it pile up if you have a couple of different things missing. You want to turn those in, get them out of the way. And if you need to reach out and talk to me about it, I am here. Sound good?
Yes.
Okay, I'm like, Maria, Christian, and Derek get points today for responding to me. Who else responded to me? A few of you responded to me on the chat, so the rest of you get Fs today.
Yes. As long as I'm not getting an F, I don't care.
Figuratively Fs. So I don't scare anyone. I see some of you are like, oh shit, am I really gonna get an F? But all right, we're done for the day. Let me